It's raining, please know that the roof can be opened, and in case the steps you just went down turn into extra outside seats. I'll stay down out here so that if it stops raining I will tell you straight away and you can all enjoy a bit of fresh air, okay? So, I understood that this is not your first tour in Venice, meaning that what is coming on our left side won't probably be such a new sight to you by this point, right? See, we have St. Mark's Square, the former seat of the political and religious power of Venice. The two giant columns that you can now spot on our left used to mark an ideal door leading into Venice in the past. So it should come as no surprise to you that they bear the symbols of the patron saints of Venice on top. You have St. Theodore slaying a crocodile to the left side and St. Mark's winged lion on the right one. This was a way to symbolically extend their protection over every single person setting foot in Venice, and especially Venice's first citizen, the Doge, living in the beautiful Gothic palace always on our left. This, as you may already know, was kind of like the White House of Venice, the house of the president. The topmost floor was occupied by the Great Council Hall, kind of like Venice Congress, whereas in the underground dungeons and under the roof you had the prisons, to which criminals would gain access by crossing the world-famous Bridge of Sighs, whose best perspective you can enjoy now, always on our left. This is not a coincidence, mind you. Remember, in fact, that for a very long time, Venice was a largely unpaved town. The campos, like you may have learned this morning, used to be grassy areas. The streets were made of dirt. There were many more canals all around Venice, but I'm afraid much fewer bridges connected their sides. This means that whenever possible, instead of walking around, Venetians would be sailing around Venice. Also meaning that every single one of the beautiful palaces, churches and bell towers that you come across Venice today is meant to be seen not from the ground, of course, but from the water. So we can say that you did a really great thing in booking a boat tour. You are going to see Venice from the most privileged perspective of all. Thumbs up for your choice. Oh, now, speaking about water, as you can see, we are crossing St. Mark's Basin, which is the large pool in front of Venice main square. The water here is about 10 meters deep. On our right side, you can behold the beautiful island of St. George the Major, boasting one of the oldest churches that we have in town today. The cathedral down there was in fact established in the year 892, even though its present-day aspect is due to a restoration by the famous architect Palladio that took place towards the end of the 16th century. Oh, now, time to leave the big stretches of water to start delving into the heart of Venice, namely all the minor canals that you have behind St. Mark's Square. This past bridge, as you can see by maybe looking at your maps, is called Rio dei Greci. The name of this minor canal allows us to point out a little curiosity about town. I mean the fact that officially in Venice there is but one canal. The Grand Canal that we're going to see during the second part of the tour. All the other 116 minor waterways that you find in Venice are commonly known as Rio, spelled R-I-O in singular and R-I-I in plural. They are all narrower and shallower than the Grand Canal, and they have always been meant for small boat circulation. Until the 16th century, instead, the Grand Canal was a sort of highway along which all the merchant ships went to reach the famous Rialto market. So Venetians thought about underlining its more important function by granting that and that only the title of canal. Rio dei Greci would literally translate as the minor canal of the Greek people, out of the beautiful Greek church that you're going to spot in a moment on our right side. There you go, this white one behind the wall with vines. This is up to this day the center of the Orthodox community in Venice. Its most striking feature is surely its dramatically leaning bell tower, whose inclination you are going to realize more and more behind us as we distance ourselves from this corner. see, this is a bit of an issue in Venice, in the sense that pretty much every single tall structure is a bit inclined on one side. And this because, like you may have learned this morning, Venice doesn't exactly rest on solid ground, right? Everything here is built over 116 sandy clay islands, all mainly made of sand and clay, which are pretty fragile kinds of ground. In order to be able to manufacture the city around you, Venetians therefore rammed all the way into the muddy bottom of the lagoon millions of tree trunks on which every single construction rests. The system, you could say, works quite well with houses soaring to no more than 4 stories in height. But bell towers going much higher and discharging their weight into a much smaller area inevitably cause this post to be pushed a bit to the sides. So in the end, every single tall structure looks a bit like that. Oh, now, if you have your cameras ready, I'd suggest you to keep an eye on our right side. You are in fact enjoying a view once denied to Venetians, namely that of Campo San Lorenzo with its enormous, albeit unfinished church on the far side. In the past, the Campo was blocked off by a very tall brick wall, like these ones that you see around us. The function of the walls was to keep the girls living into St. Lawrence Nunnery, this pink palace behind us, into their cells. As you may imagine, in fact, that was the nunnery where most of the daughters coming out of the aristocratic families of Venice would be often forced to take votes when their parents couldn't afford the dowries for their weddings. Of course, this means that the girls found in the convent had absolutely no interest in the religious career whatsoever. So much so that St. Lawrence Nunnery was commonly known as the most scandalous nunnery in town. Girls would never be wearing the nun's uniform. They sneaked out of their cells to attend carnivals and parties. They had boyfriends visiting them regularly. True, such a life was most the consequence of their family status, but many Venetians mused that it may be due to the fact that the convent rose just beside a red light district, located in the buildings that you can now see on our sides. The presence of this red light district is the reason why this Rio is called the Rio Tetta, and the bridge that we're going underneath now, as you may have spotted on the wall, is called the Ponte Tetta. If you're a bit familiar with Italian, you will probably know that teta is a slightly vulgar word that translates as teats. Of course, out of the most common view that came from these windows in the past. Now, speaking about bridges, as you may imagine, they are essential to connect the various islands on which Venice is built. There is an average of 2-3 bridges for every island, so today we have 423 bridges all around Venice. Out of these, however, only 40 or so are made in iron, like the Conzafelsi bridge that we just went underneath. Fewer still, no more than 19, are built in wood. This means that 90% of all the bridges in Venice is manufactured with bricks or stones, like Ponte Minic that we pass underneath now. The reason for this, as you may imagine, is very simple. Both iron and wood get ruined very quickly in the extremely rainy Venetian weather and the brackish water that surrounds town. So in the end, the brick structures prove to be much better investments. See, there's a bit of a traffic jam because this is a sort of a crossroads. Also, we have a beautiful gondola on our left. As per the traffic rules in Venice, all rowing boats have priority, so you must always stop to give them, free of space. And once they have done turning, you can resume your travel. Now we slowly turn to the right to start moving down Rio dei Mendicanti. This is the border between the district of Castello on our right side and that of Cannaregio on our left. They would be the 2 largest and most densely inhabited of all the 6 districts in which Venice is divided today. Now, if you partook in the walking tour this morning, the campo which is now coming on our right may be a bit of a déjà vu, I know, but it's always worth a second glance, don't you think? This is the wonderful Campo St. John and Paul with the enormous Dominicans Cathedral to the right. In the past, this church was commonly known as the Pantheon of the Doges. Like the Pantheon in Rome, where the Roman emperors were buried, this church too was in fact the official burial site for all the Doges and the military heroes of Venice. The church is found just beside the former Great School of St. Mark, this building on our right, whose beautiful facade you have just enjoyed. Now please be careful because the name is a bit deceiving, see? Schools in past Venice were not, as you may think, institutions for the children to get an education. This was the seat of a lay brotherhood, having what we would nowadays call insurance functions. Venetians would sign up to these or one of the other hundreds of schools available in town by leaving a monthly portion here. The money would be set aside and only given back to the person if anything bad ever happened. You may imagine becoming too sick or too old to go on working, or losing everything in one of the very common fires, plagues and shipwrecks happening at the time. You could say that this vocation for helping others somehow continues up to this day, because the Great School of St. Mark has become the seat of Venice Civil Hospital. So as you may imagine, these yellow motor launches on our right are Venice ambulances. Speaking about boats, if you look on our left, here where you see the white and red post, we are coming across one of the last remaining squari of Venice. The squari would be the traditional boatyards where the gondolas and the rowing boats have been built and repaired for centuries. We used to have tens of these in Venice in the past. Today, I'm afraid only a handful remains, and not all of them are active because, as you may imagine, Venetians prefer to buy motorboats instead of rowing ones. To cheer us up for the progressive disappearance of the square, we have a little surprise ready for you. As you can see, we are leaving Venice for a moment to start exploring a bit of the Northern Lagoon together. Here we go! I apologize in advance for the choppy ride. See here, there's a bit more wave, more wind and more water, so the waves make it bumpier. Still, the sights are really worth it. You get to see a lot. For instance, on our right, you can now behold the St. Michael's Island, the seat of Venice monumental graveyard since 1807. Before that time, however, these truly used to be two separate patches of land. You had the island of St. Christopher, which is its rightmost side, and then the proper island of St. Michael, where you see the big monumental gate in the middle. The islands used to house a windmill and a monastery respectively, because like we have just seen, at the time Venetians were buried in town, either in front of their parish church or sometimes directly inside. It was only when Napoleon conquered Venice for the second time, so in 1807, that for hygienic reasons he ordered all the tombs to be moved outside of the city borders. For this reason, Venetians filled in the canal once divided these two islands. They raised its ground a couple of meters, and that has become the final resting place of all Venetians ever since. If instead you take a peek behind us, where you can see the big white cranes, the trees and the brick towers in the distance, you are looking at the Arsenale, the old shipyard of Venice. That is where every single one of Venice warships and merchant ships used to be built in the past. In the Arsenale, 16,000 arsenalotti, so 16,000 carpenters would be daily employed. These men were so specialized in their task and so many that they could literally build a ship in the space of one day. For this reason, many consider that the very first assembly line in the world, 500 years older than Henry Ford's first large-scale industrial site. Speaking about manufacture, if you look on our right side now, you can instead see Murano, the island where all the glass kilns of Venice have literally been kicked since 1295. Just like the tombs, until the 13th century, the glass kilns were mostly located in Venice, where, however, they soon started to pose a bit of a threat. See, the issue was that to melt the sands and the ashes required to make glass, you had to reach very high temperatures in the furnaces, but alas, at the time, Venice was mostly built in wood. So you may imagine how often the glass kilns accidentally set ablaze entire neighborhoods while producing the glass. For this reason, the Major Council of Venice ordered all the glass masters to transfer to Murano. That was a very smooth move because it not only spared Venice from the risk of fires, it also allowed us to counter industrial espionage. Many think that what made our glass so special was the fact that it was blown glass. But truly, the glass blowing technique had been invented by the Romans centuries before the birth of Venice. This means that what truly made our glass so special were its ingredients. Remember when we saw that to make glass you need sands and ashes? Well, the glass masters anywhere else in Europe until the 16th century could only use the sands found on the shores, and they had to burn hardwood to produce the ashes necessary. This means that their glass, which was commonly known as wood glass, was commonly based on potassium, so it was pretty dark in color and pretty opaque. Venetians, on the opposite hand, were the only ones who could produce sea glass, a special kind of ware born out of the fine sands coming from the Dolomites, plus a special kind of ashes produced out of burning seaweeds. From a chemical point of view, sea glass was something slightly different than wood glass. It was based on soda, so it was colorless and very transparent. You could grant it different shades of colors if you added the minerals or metal oxides to the sands and ashes mixtures. But these, the recipes were basically the result of random discoveries kept secret within the single glass kiln. So see, it was impossible to replicate exactly the same shade of color unless you had been, born or you had always worked into one specific glass kiln. You could, of course, ask a higher price for this kind of special glass, and we kept the price high for more than 500 years simply by kicking all the glass factories to Murano. Oh, now, if you look on our right side in a moment, you can get a glimpse of the beautiful church of the Madonna dell'Orto. It is a wonderful Gothic construction formerly dedicated to Saint Christopher, whose statue you can still see over the main portal. Would be the gentleman with the walking cane and the child on his shoulder. Today the church is known as the Madonna dell'Orto, which means the Church of the Virgin in the Garden. Tradition has it that the name was changed around the 14th century, when this temple started to house a miraculous statue of the Holy Virgin carved by a sculptor living in this area. The statue was meant to be placed into Santa Maria Formosa's church that you may have seen this morning during the walking tour. Alas, when the chief priest saw the sculpture's work, he wasn't too happy with the results, I'm afraid. He said that the statue was ugly, so the poor stone carver had no other choice but to take this little effigy of the Holy Mary, bring it back home, and leave it in the only large space he had available, his garden, orto in the local dialect. That is when his wife realized that the statue would glow in the dark at night, and what's more, that it would grant miracles to those who went there on procession. Something that, as you may imagine, started a real pilgrimage to this poor stone carver's house. He had people knocking at his door night and day to see the Holy Virgin. So, to be able to enjoy some peace and quiet, he asked for the statue to be moved somewhere more solemn. The nearby church of St. Christopher, befittingly renamed the Church of the Virgin in the Garden ever since. How we do it down in there with the temperature? Is it warm? A bit warm. If you want, we can open a bit more the door so you have more, air circulation. Okay. I'm sorry the rain doesn't seem to be willing to stop, because otherwise we could also maybe open a bit of the window in the back. Still, I hope that you can get a bit more breeze with the doors open. See, as you can see, we are back into Venice, and to be precise in Cannareggio, which is the northernmost part of town. This is where most of the Venetians like to live today, partly because the prices for real estate are a bit less crazy, mostly because it is unlikely for majority of the tourists to come all the way up here, so life is actually a bit quieter. Since this is a mostly residential part of town, all around us you get to see many private boats. This may perhaps lead you to think that all Venetians own a motor launch, like people generally own a car on the mainland, right? In truth, things are not quite so. We have relatively few boats compared to the total number of inhabitants today, and this you could say for a double reason. First off, motor launches are very expensive, so you need to be able to afford one to start with. What's more, in order to have your own private boat, the town hall demands that you have a space where to park it. Alas, not all houses have a garage of some kind, and at the same time, not all the rios are long enough or wide enough for people to park the boats along the walkways. When worse comes to worse, true, you can rely on public parking lots, but those too tend to be, very expensive, and what's worse, they have curfew. So see, you spend a lot of money and still you cannot enjoy your boat as you want. That is the reason why, whenever possible, Venetians prefer not to have a motor launch altogether. Either they walk around Venice, or they take very much use of the public transportation, which comes at a much discounted price to them. Now, on our left side and also on our right side, an unusual sight, new buildings. These blocks of apartment to our left date back to the early 1980s, in fact, pretty much like the tennis court which is now on our left side. You don't really find anything newer than this in town today, because since 1987, Venice is part of the UNESCO's World Heritage List. This means that from that moment onwards, the whole city center has come to be considered like one big work of art, one big monument. You cannot raise down old buildings to make room for new ones. And at the same time, you cannot change the exterior outlook of the facades. If you want to buy or rent out a dwelling spot, the prices are really crazy. And what's worse, these houses always need constant restoration, for which you need specialized workers and a lot of bureaucracy to go through. This, as you may imagine, inevitably makes living in Venice extremely costly and also a bit impractical, often tempting Venetians to ditch their hometown, moving to the mainland all the way on our right side, where everything is cheaper and surely more practical. Speaking about the mainland, today Venice is connected to it through the Liberty Bridge, the 4-kilometer long railway and car bridge that you will be able to spot in front of our eyes in a moment. The bridge was built after the end of the Venetian Republic in two steps. The rail side between 1848 and 1852 as per order of the Austrian government, to which basically Napoleon sold Venice. The car section instead was added between 1932 and 1933 as per order of the Italian fascist government. This means that as long as Venice was the capital city of the most serene republic, the bridge of course was not there. Venice was totally isolated, completely surrounded by water. if you wanted to come here, you necessarily needed a boat. And for this reason, the entrance to town was not the train station or the bus station like today. It was St. Mark's Square. The two giant columns in the piazzetta were also the sign of the city's main docks. This corner of the lagoon is also a great place where to see the bricole up close. The bricole would be these clusters of poles, generally 3 in number, that mark the sides of the canals. So they tell you where the water is deeper and where it is safer to go. As you can see by looking at the ones on our left, they all have a number stenciled on the side. It's meant to, come in handy if ever your boat stalls in the lagoon and you need to be towed away. See, here there are no big points of reference that you can tell to the rescue team, especially at night when this becomes pitch black. So when worst comes to worst, you just call the emergency number, tell them the number of the vehicle closer to you, and they'll be able to locate your position, coming to your rescue in no time. We are now back into Venice, and to be precise in Rio di Cannareggio, which is the widest of all the minor canals that you have in town. It owes its name to the very district in which it is set, Cannareggio, probably meaning bunch of reeds in the early local dialect. Until the 17th century, in fact, there were many more rivers flowing into the lagoon, so the water was not as salty as it is today. Reeds consequently tended to flourish, especially in this part of town, which was the last one to be built upon. Rio di Cannareggio is so wide, here and only here you get to see a bridge consisting not in one arch, but in rather 3 arches. There you go. It is the Ponte Tre Archi we go underneath now. The architect who had this built said he wanted to craft something the way the Romans used to do, which is the reason why he recovered their construction technique for bridges, always calling for multiple arches to be done. That was a very nice aesthetical choice, but I'm afraid not the most practical one, because as you may have seen, the 3 arches bridge is a waste of space. You can only go underneath the centermost arch, but the side ones are too small to be used also as parking lots. That tells you how come Venetians like one arch bridge is so much better. It's a little trick for us to make the most of the space, also out of the narrowest waterways. Rio di Cannareggio is also a great spot in town where to see the Altane of Venice. The Altane being these lovely wooden terraces that you often spot on the rooftops of Venetian buildings. There is a particularly nice one coming on our left side with colorful glass lamps. Altane, of course, comes from alto, which is high in Italian, because they are always located in the topmost floors. That is where today we like to hang the washing up or maybe relax in the sun and the evening breeze. But until the 16th century, the Altane were the spots where Venetians would generally go to cook their meals. Like we saw before, in fact, Venice for a very long time was mostly crafted in wood, so it was risky to cook with open flames in your house. Whenever possible, Venetians would therefore go on the top of the roof to prepare lunch and dinner. When Venice started to be built more and more in bricks, so from the 16th century onwards, the Altane changed their functions and started to play a pivotal role in the ladies' beauty treatment. Every Saturday afternoon, in fact, the noble ladies would go to the top of their house Altana to bleach their hair using waters of youth. These were acid concoctions, a mixture of lemon juice, vinegar, vitriol, ashes, honey. There were actually various recipes, but all the perfums agreed on one fact. You had to soak a sponge in this concoction, subsequently putting it on a very long stick, which you had to use to sponge your hair. If subsequently left out to dry in the sun and the sea breeze, these concoctions would gradually cause your hair to bleach naturally until it got a blondish reddish shade of color, commonly known up to this day as Titian's red. Titian, in fact, was the very first painter to depict it in his canvases. To boost the procedure, the ladies were advised to wear a solana all the while, a sort of large hat without a bottom but with a very wide brim all around, that you could of course use to stretch all your hair strings on top, so that by the end of the day they would all get an equal shade of Titian red. Of course, this was something must done by the noble ladies who had a lot of time to kill. Like all aristocrats, they would be living as close as possible to Venice's main waterway, the Grand Canal, which we have at long last reached. Here we go. As you have said before, this for a very long time, and up to this day, was the main waterway of Venice. Until the 16th century, it was nothing but a sort of highway cutting across a fairly ugly industrial site, meaning that instead of all these beautiful palaces and churches that you see around us, at first its banks were lined with low wooden constructions serving the needs of the Rialto market up ahead. Here you had for this reason shops, boatyards, warehouses. You also had many fonteghi, commonly translated as trade houses. They were palaces where the foreign merchants could live when they were in town for their business. Every single nationality of merchant had its own trade house somewhere. The Turkish merchants, for instance, would be living in the Turkish trade house that you can now see on our right side. There you go. This is found just beside the former granary of millet. Today it is the seat of a primary school, which, curiously enough, directly overlooks House Vendramin Calergi, Venice gambling house. Can you see the inscription under the windows in the ground floor? Non nobis. It would mean not ask God in Latin. Tradition has it that the Grimani family, who had this palace built in early 15th century, got the money out of terribly violent ways. They had lots of beatings, lots of murders, so they had a lot of blood smeared on their hands, and everybody was sure that they would all end up in hell at the end of their lives. Still, when the Vendramin family bought the palace from the Grimani, they were concerned that the same fate may befall also their household, which is the reason why they had this inscription added on the outside. Not us, God, it was not us to commit all these crimes, we just bought the palace, so please have mercy. On our right you can see the wonderful Baroque church of San Stai, which directly overlooks the House Barbarigo, and this yellow palace with the flags and the white and red posts is House Gussoni. If you look under the topmost windows, you will still see traces of frescoes. These on our left probably depicted angels or cherubs. I know it sounds crazy, but in the past, every single one of the facades around you was totally painted over, all the way up to the chimneys, considered an element of no second importance when it came to the beauty of the palace. Alas, as you may imagine, the frescoes do not last so well when exposed to the rain and the sun. So already in the 17th century, Venetians started to use marbles and stones to decorate the facades of their palaces, as in case of House Pesaro or House Cornero of the Queen that you have just spotted on our right. These were very expensive because you had to import them from the mainland. Still, if they were not prestigious enough, you could select an alternative means of decoration for your house, gilding. If you look on our left now, you can see the famous Ca d'Oro, the most beautiful civil palace in Venice. It should really be called the Ca Contarini, so House Contarini, out of its owner, but it has been renamed the Ca d'Oro, the Gilt House, because all the pinnacles on the top and most of the details on its facade used to be covered in gold leaf in the past. What's more, the empty spaces were painted in blue and black, so you may imagine what a marvel that must have looked like as long as the original decoration was on. The Gilt House is found nearly opposite the financial and economical heart of Venice, namely the Rialto Market on our right. This brick loggia with the red curtains is where you have the fish market from Tuesday to Saturday morning, whereas the low green huts to the side is where you have the fruit and vegetable vendors. Some of them also like to linger here in the afternoon, so you always find something open. In the past, Rialto was a bit like Wall Street, one of the centers of worldwide economics and finance, also appearing in one of the first lines of Shakespeare's famous play, The Merchant of Venice. Today it is the best spots to go for lunch or dinner. You have lots of little restaurants serving good food for reasonable prices. What's more, it's a great place to go to savor the spritz, that orange cocktail which seems to be ubiquitous in Venice. Spritz is made up of 1/3 white wine, 1/3 sparkling water, and 1/3 liquor. You can choose among Aperol, Select, Bitter, or Cynar. They make it more or less bitter in taste and different in color. The Aperol version is the one that makes it orange. It is served with a slice of orange and a couple of ice cubes, and you can regard it as a symbol for Venice today, just like the Rialto Bridge, in front of which we have finally come. Here we go.
Posso capire perché noi ragazzi di serventi ci conviene,
For a very long time, this was the only bridge connecting the two sides of Venice. It was built in this precise spot because this is where the Grand Canal becomes a bit narrower. As you can see, instead of being 50 meters as an average, it is only 30 meters across. Truth be told, what you see here is not the original Rialto Bridge, I'm afraid. It would be the fourth version. Before this, there were 3 more bridges, all built in wood, and all likely designed as drawbridges that could be opened up in the middle to let the merchant ships through. Alas, as we have seen before, wood is not the best kind of material for bridges, right? So much so that all the previous 3 ones had problems. The first Rialto Bridge, for example, was burned down in 1310 during a riot, whereas the second crumbled during a wedding parade in 1444. Third one was rebuilt as a replacement, but maybe a bit too hastily because it had to be dismantled less than 60 years later, at the beginning of the 16th century. That is when Venetians decided to have the bridge rebuilt for the 4th time. But this time they chose a stone construction, hoping that it would last a bit better. It costed us a fortune because, as we have seen, stones had to be imported from the outside, but it served its purpose because the present-day bridge has been in place since 1592. What's more, the restoration going on these days is the very first one since its construction, so you can easily say that the bridge has survived 500 years and 2 world wars without the need to ever carry out repairs. Of course, the moment the Rialto Bridge was rebuilt in stone, you could no longer open it up for the ships. That is what caused the Grand Canal to change its function from highway into the 5th Avenue of Venice, the most beautiful boulevard in town where all the richest people wanted to have one of their palaces built. bigger your house, the better, of course. So if you look at House Goimani, which we have just left on our left, or maybe at the house Papadopoli Tiepolo, this one with the blue poles, I bet you can tell that they were very wealthy families, right? The Tiepolos also had a private garden, something extremely rare to find in Venice, because you had to reserve a large space that couldn't be destined to the common people's dwelling sites, and you had to raise the ground a couple of meters to shelter the grass and the trees from the floodings. Today, all the palaces that you have around us are therefore former noble mansions. As such, they always have two doors. One is the so-called land door opening up on the street. The other one is the water door directly facing the Grand Canal. Land door was a bit like the palace back entrance. It was only used by the poor people or the servants because it gave onto the unpaved and therefore very muddy streets. Of course, this means that whenever the landlord or the members of the family had to go about their business, they would only be using the water door, where the private gondola usually awaited to carry them all around Venice. This is the reason why the water doors are always highlighted by the palline. These poles painted in stripes of different colors that you can spot everywhere around us. They were the gondola stockings poles, okay, but the colors were always the same as those on the family crest. So it was also an easy way to show off, letting everybody understand that your family was the lucky one to live inside. And on our right, you see many gondolas docked. If you look at them from behind, you can surely realize that they are all asymmetrical boats. One side is larger than the other one, and it is also built at a slightly different inclination. So, regardless of whether you have passengers inside or not, the gondolas always travel around inclined to the right. This is not a mistake, mind you. It is meant to balance the weight of the gondoliere that, as you may have seen, always rows on the back and on the left side. What's more, since the gondola is 33 feet in length but moves around with one only oar, if it were made symmetrically, it would end up spinning around. This way, instead, the gondoliere can easily set it in all directions possible. Now we have reached also Volta di Canale, which is the largest bend that the Grand Canal describes in its course. This enormous brick palace on our right side is Ca' Foscari, which would be the headquarters of the Venetian University. Conversely, the big white palace on our shoulders is House Balbi. It is today the seat of the local government, but it is also the palace where Napoleon lived for a little while after conquering Venice in 1797. The obelisks on the roof had always marked the houses where the admirals of the Venetian fleet lived, so they were a symbol of a high-ranking officer, just like Napoleon, to be found inside. Still, Napoleon was not the only famous person to roam this neighborhood, because the lovely parish of St. Samuel, now on our left side, is, unbeknownst to many, Giacomo Casanova's birthplace. Right behind this beautiful rose garden, you will be able to see a beige house with brown shutters. That is the house where Casanova was born on the 2nd of April 1725. Aside from his hundreds of love affairs that made him the stuff of legend up to this day, Casanova is also famous for having been the only person to escape the Piombi, the terrible prisons located under the roof of the Doge's palace. Piombi comes from piombo, which means lead in Italian, because the roof of the palace up to this day is covered in lead plates. This means that the cells underneath would become freezing cold in winter or extremely hot in summer. They were truly a terrible place where to be sent, and Casanova, of course, ended up in there because of his immoral behavior. However, since he enjoyed many friends among the aristocracy, he was also granted a special treatment upon conviction. They would let him walk out of his cell from time to time to stretch his legs. And that is how one day he got his hands on a little piece of chain with a sharp edge still attached on one side. He was clever enough to bring this into his cell, using it when the guardians were not on watch to dislodge one of the lead plates, making his escape on the roof of the palace. At the time, the 2nd November 1755, the Piombi were considered the safest prisons in the world. So it's a bit like saying that Casanova escaped from Alcatraz. What's more, at the time, the Academy Bridge that we have just passed underneath didn't exist yet. Together with the Scalzi Bridge by the train station, it is one of the two bridges added on the Grand Canal by the Austrians in mid-19th century. See, they wanted to favor pedestrian circulation, so they added many more bridges all around town. In the same period, mid-19th century, the facade of House Barbarigo, now on our right side, was totally covered in mosaics that you can enjoy now. They portray scenes of glass masters at work producing the glass tiles for St. Mark's Basilica, whereas the two portraits in the circles on the top are those of Titian and Sansovino respectively, the two most important artists in 16th century Venice, which is the epoch in which the palace was built. Now, always on our right, you can also see House Venier of the Lions, Peggy Guggenheim's dwelling spot from 1949 to 1979. You could say that Peggy is actually still there, buried in the garden where you see the trees, together with her 14 dogs, the only stable company she had in town. Today, of course, there is nobody living inside, just like you have nobody daring to live in Palazzo Daio, this big palace under restoration, always on the same side. Palazzo Daio is the infamous cursed palace of Venice. It is a bit disturbing, if I take a list of its owners, to realize how many of them either lost all of their money in financial crisis or they died in a pretty violent way, generally by committing suicide or by being found dead in the palace. The curse seems to start with Giovanni Dario, who had the palace built in 1450s, and goes all the way to Raul Gardini, the last occupant who shot himself in there in 1993. This, of course, has led Venetians to think that there is a curse hanging over the place, so they refuse to live even close to the palace, even though this would be a much sought-after part of the Grand Canal. Very close to Ernest Hemingway's favorite hotel, the Greedy Palace, which you have spotted on our left, and in the very same district as the beautiful church of La Salute, now on our right side. There you go. This is the Church of Good Health. It was in fact built after a terrible Black Plague epidemic taking place in 1630 and 1631. Venetians had absolutely no clue what was causing the plague at the time. They thought it was a kind of divine punishment, so they asked the Holy Virgin to spare the population in return for a church to be built and dedicated to her. Looks like the Virgin was easily bribed, because 2 weeks later the plague had already stopped altogether. That is when Baldassare Longhena, the youngest Baroque architect to ever be awarded a commission for a public spot, was called upon to design this church, which is all based on only two numbers, 8 and 11. They would stand for resurrection and God in the Jewish tradition, in which Longhena was well versed. They are the reason why, if you look closely, you will certainly realize that the church is not circular in plan, but rather an octagon. So it's got 8 sides all around, 8 pointed stars over the semicircular windows, 8 domes all together, and 11 big stone curves supporting the centermost dome. What's more, its measurement read 121 feet in length and 88 feet in height. Needless to say, 11 times 11 and 11 times 8 again. Church of Good Health is found just beside the former custom house of Venice, this white palace with the golden globe on top. Over Behind that you can see a statue of Fortune, the goddess of luck, holding a sail and a rope in her hands. It's quite easy to see today that just like the gilt bronze Archangel Gabriel over St. Mark's Bell Tower, Lady Luck too up there is truly a windcock. She moves around with the strongest gust of wind. She played, of course, a practical purpose for the seafarers stopping there to pay taxes, but she also bore a hidden message of some kind, a warning to be precise. Be wary, because your fortune may change just like the wind does. So pay your taxes now that you have money to do so. Don't wait. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was a little joke to cheer you up because as you can see we are back into St. Mark's Basin, meaning that our little boat tour is slowly approaching its end. I hope that you enjoyed our exploration of the waterways of Venice like me and Matthew enjoyed being in your company. Now, as you can imagine, we will be looking for an available pier, after which we tie the boat, hop off, and we'll be ready to let you go. In the meantime, I would like to thank you very much again for choosing Avventura Bellissime for your tour. I wish you a lovely stay in Venice, a lovely evening, and well, either a safe journey back home or a nice continuation of your holiday, if, as I hope, this is not your last stop in Italy. Thank you so much also for your kind attention. It's been a real pleasure to meet you all. Please take care and enjoy the rest of your time in town. See you, bye-bye. You're too kind, really, you make me blush. Oh, we're in luck. We got on the blue pontoon. I'll put away the microphone and we'll be ready to let you go. Thank you so much. Okay, bravo Mattia.